Welcome to the Shudder. I've got some Mississippi Bigfoot encounter stories for you. I know I said I would try to put these videos together by state, but that may be a little more of a challenge than I expected. No matter where they're from, I will get new videos and encounters up, either as they come in or as I can find them. Okay, get ready, find that lazy boy, and settle in. As a teenager in York, Alabama, we would drive to Meridian, Mississippi on Saturday nights. It was the nearest large town, and we would cruise for entertainment. One evening in August, myself and two friends decided to drive down a highway that went southwest out of Meridian. I can't recall how far down this highway we went, but we turned off onto a dirt road that went east. We stopped on this road to answer the call of nature. One friend got out of the driver's side, and the other friend and myself on the passenger side. In the high beams ahead of us, we could see a one-lane bridge. There was a large oak tree across the ditch from us on the passenger side of the car. While we were standing outside the car talking, a loud noise started coming from up in the trees. It sounded like a grunt and growl combined. The noise was repeated several times, and one of the tree limbs started thrashing up and down violently. Our eyes had not adjusted to the darkness good yet, and we could not see what was making the noise. As we were looking, we made out something large jump out of the tree and land in the ditch and take off running. As you can imagine, this had us pretty shaken up already, but that was nothing compared to the feeling we had when this thing ran into the area that was illuminated by the headlights on bright. This creature was running on two legs. It was covered in grayish-black hair, and it was extremely well muscled. We could see the muscles rippling as it ran. The ditch it was running in was 2.5 to 3 feet deep, and my eyes were level with the back of this creature's head. I am 6 feet tall, so I estimate the creature to be at least 8.5 to 9 feet tall. The back of its head was shaped like a teardrop that is flat on top. We could not tell the length of its arms as they were bent at the elbow as it ran, but the elbows were pumping back and forth very fast. When it reached the bridge, it jumped down the bank in one bound and was out of sight, but we could still hear its footsteps going south for several seconds. We were all so scared, we jumped in the car, turned around, and got out of there as fast as we could go. It was months before I worked up the courage to go back in the daylight, and by then, any sign it would have left was long gone. I have been an avid hunter and outdoorsman since the age of 8, and I have never seen an animal like that before or since. Just after dark one evening, me and 3 of my friends were at a small pond just off Hanging Moss Road in Jackson, Mississippi. We were doing what we did a lot of back then, hung out, drinking a few beers. We were kicked back and had the radio going pretty mellow for the day when my friend Tim, whose car we were in, said, "Did you hear that?" We turned the radio down and rolled the windows down a little, but heard nothing. So we turned the radio back up, and a few minutes later, we did hear something. It was a pretty loud growl, not like anything I'd heard before. We were on the north side of the pond, and it was on the south side. There were cattails that were at least 7 feet tall on that side of the pond. Tim turned on the headlights, and across the pond there was what looked like a huge hairy ape with large green eyes, and it was turning its head slightly from one side to the other. We could see it blinking. The eyes were lit up because of our headlights. Of course, that got all of our attention. I remember asking everyone if they saw what I saw, and we all agreed that it was a Bigfoot and was standing on the other side of this small pond. It had to be at least 8 feet tall and had a very cone-shaped head, just like a silverback gorilla. It was black as far as I could tell, and it was making some grunting sounds every few seconds. We cut the headlights off and cranked the car, which took a few tries to fire up. When we first tried to start the car, the animal let out the most spine-tingling roar I've ever heard. Kind of like a lion's grunt, but much louder and longer. The car fired up and we got out of there. When the headlights came back on, it was still standing there. I have to say, it scared us so bad we didn't tell many people, but it has remained a powerful memory for many years. I can still hear that roar. It was quite distinctive. I grew up in those woods since I was 7, and I always felt like something was watching me. We rode everything from bicycles to dirt bikes on those trails. At the time of the sighting, the area was being developed into an industrial park. Highway 220 bypass was in the first stages. We were on the edge of Jackson at the time, and unlike today, it was a lot of forest. There were a good many streams and ponds in that area. I moved from Mississippi in 1996. I spent a lot of time in the woods after that, but never saw tracks or any sign of Bigfoot again. Although I did know about it and did look for tracks pretty much whenever I was in the woods, I know I'll never forget that night and the sight of that incredible creature. I was on a hunting lease around North Sardis Lake, hanging a tree stand for deer hunting the next day before the season opened. I felt kind of uneasy while I was out there, but thought little of it at the time. The next day, I got up early and made it to the hunting lease just before daylight. I knew I was the only person in there because the trails hadn't been used for some time. I rode in about 2 miles and then walked about 300 yards to where I had put my climber. It was just past daybreak, and I was 20 feet or so up a pine tree when I heard what sounded like someone beating a stick against a tree. I spotted some movement in the area the sound was coming from, and I could see something, but couldn't tell what it was. Whatever it was looked brown in color and tall. My first thought was a bear. I was using my binoculars, but it was about 200 yards from me and down a hill, so I pulled up my rifle and took a look through the scope, hoping I could see it better. When I got a clear look at it, I could see it wasn't any bear. It didn't have ears on top of its head, and its face was flat. It was at least 8 feet tall and stood like a man. I noticed the skin was grayish-green where the hair was thin. I was so startled I stood up. When I did, it turned toward my direction. It knew I was there. It leaned its head back as if smelling the air, and then it took off. It moved 40 or so yards in just a few seconds and was gone. I was a little freaked out by it and unsure of what it was, but still in stunned disbelief at what I thought it could have been. I got straight down and started walking in the direction I had seen it. I walked over to the hill where it had slid and left a track. It was a human-looking foot track. This scared me more because I was trying to tell myself it was just a bear. Suddenly, a sound came from the thicket in front of me. It was close and sounded like whoop, whoop. As soon as I heard it, I hurried back, got my stand, and left those woods. That was 6 years ago. Since then, any time I told anyone my story, they made fun of me. So I've been reserved about letting anyone know till recently. A friend of mine had an encounter. He doesn't want to let anyone know because he thinks people will think he's crazy. We got together and found several websites and was amazed at how many people have seen these creatures. I am sorry for those that have felt traumatized by their experience, but there's something comforting about knowing others have seen and experienced the same thing I have. I lived in Mississippi when I was a child. I was about 6 years old when this occurred. I was asleep in my bedroom one night on the second floor of our home when the neighbor's dog began barking wildly at something in the yard. It made such a fuss that my siblings and I finally got out of bed to see what the commotion was all about. Looking down from our window, we saw something in the garden, which was right next to the house. There was only natural light, but the thing was only about 20 or 30 feet away, and I can still remember it vividly. It was squatting down, eating the vegetables from the garden. I could even hear it eating from where I stood. A moment later, we all screamed in surprise and shock at what it did. It looked right at us, and then just kept right on eating. I remember by its mannerisms it had no fear of us whatsoever, and made no attempt to leave the area or hide in any way, though I know it had to hear us screaming. What I remember was a creature that was built like a human being. I can't say exactly how big it was, but I know it was bigger than the average person. It was covered all over with dark, shaggy brown hair, and when it looked up at us, we could see its eyes glowing white in the darkness. Eventually, my grandfather woke up and saw it too. He went out the side door with his gun and fired up into the air. We continued to watch out the window, and when the shot rang out, we saw the creature stand up and run off on 2 legs into the woods toward the river. I remember it ran so fast that I could hardly believe it. The next morning, we found very large, human-like footprints in the garden. I have never seen anything like that before, and never have since. There you go. That was 4 Mississippi Bigfoot encounters. I know they're short, but it's what gets submitted or what I can find. Y'all give me some ideas what you'd like to hear, and I'll do my best to put it together. If you'd like to hear your encounter or strange happening told on here, just email me and I'll be happy to record it. My email is in the description. Okay, if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and a share, and if you subscribe, make sure you hit that notification bell so you can join me here next time for the Shudder.